Well, happy November, everybody. Welcome to our monthly YouTube chat that we do on a special topic every month. And this month, our topic is color wheel. We called it color wheel corrections for kind of a fun purpose. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. But before we get into the actual chat itself, a little bit of housekeeping, and also giving everybody time to begin to come on. The housekeeping goes like this. First thing, not everybody can ask questions because we have to have it monitored so that it's easy to see the questions and answer the questions. So in order to ask questions, you join. And you become a member. Now, when you become a member of the channel, the YouTube channel, not the website. A lot of people get confused about that sometimes. But you become a member of the YouTube channel, and of course, then that will entitle you to a code every month, a coupon code every month. And here come the frogs again. Excuse me. That will entitle you to a coupon code that will get you a free video lesson every month. And it's all explained how to do that every time the code comes out. So yeah, and so in addition to the lesson, the free lesson, you also have the opportunity to ask questions during the chat. Just want to make that clear. I see some folks are beginning to come in now. Hey, Cheryl and Carolyn and Deb and Dennis so far. So we will just we'll give a little bit more time here for folks to come in, but we'll get started pretty soon. So also I want to let you know that the workshops that I do every month, we will not have a workshop in December. So don't expect a workshop in December, but we will do our YouTube chat in December. The same, is it the third Sunday as usual in December, Roger? I know that gets pretty close to Christmas, so I think we hadn't really taken a look at that. I'll wait for Roger to look that up to see. Okay, why don't we go ahead? I think enough folks have come in now.
Yeah, the 18th.
18th, on the 18th of December, yeah, we will do a live chat. And maybe folks will just join in our live chat just to get a break from all the rush and bustle that we all experienced during that season. Okay, let's see. Is there something else I need to remind them of? Did I pretty much cover?
I think.
Okay. All right. So we're going to give the color wheel today a good working over. Folks don't, I got to be careful how I say this. There are just too many who don't realize how helpful a color wheel can be to us when we're trying to come up with the right color. And one use of the word corrections in the title is that often we can use the color wheel to find corrections in color that we need, but also it's about let's use that color wheel correctly. Let's use it in a way that will enable that to happen. So we're going to do like we normally do, where we start out with a little intro video I've made for you that introduces the topic to you, and then while the video is playing, when questions come up, go ahead and make a note of those questions, but don't ask them in the chat yet, because you won't be able, it'll sort of distract your attention. They're really easier for us to find if you wait until the video's over before you ask your questions. But just go ahead and make a note of any questions you have while the video's playing. So we got that, and we got others that have come on now. Let's see, Eve, Ellen, Helen, Victoria, Grant, Mary, Maurice, and Terry. Hello to you all and welcome. And I think it's time to get going. So Roger, are you ready?
All right.
Okay, here we go with our intro video. By color wheel corrections, we mean we're correcting how we read the color wheel, how we use the color wheel in order to achieve better results in mixing color for our painting. So let's get into the secrets of color for successful painting. How do we read the color wheel? The color wheel is a diagram of the relationship of hues. Now, it doesn't tell us anything about value, and it really doesn't tell us anything about the saturation. But what it does tell us, or what it shows us, is how hues relate to each other. So to begin to explain how that works, it starts with what we call the primaries. These are the hues, not color, but hues that cannot be created by any other hues, but when mixed together do create other hues. And those, of course, are yellow and red and blue. The relationship begins when two hues are mixed into each other, giving us a new hue. So we can say that yellow and red, when combined together, will give us orange. But we can also say that when those two colors are combined together with more yellow than red, we get yellow-orange. On the other side, we can say that when yellow and blue are combined together, we get green. But when yellow and blue are combined together in proportion of more yellow than blue, we get yellow-green. And the same system works throughout the color wheel. So with equal visual amounts of yellow and blue, we get green. With more blue than yellow, we get blue-green. Of course, with blue, there is no way to mix blue, and that's why it's called a primary color. And that same principle works throughout the color wheel. So that can contribute to our ability to mix colors when we think of color as being a hue, and a hue that has many values, and a hue that has many possibilities of saturation. Now, as to how we use these as painters, that's exciting. First of all, it's the hues that we work with when we're mixing color. Whereas if we're thinking about the tube color, for example, if we're going for a certain kind of blue, and we're debating between phthalo blue and ultramarine blue, which would live about right here on the wheel, that is sort of a hit and miss. But if we're really watching the hue in the color, and we see it leaning more towards green, more towards what we know or have perceived to be blue-green, then we know that phthalo blue or cerulean blue would be the color to choose. On the other hand, if we are seeing that blue lean more in the direction of violet, then we'll know that choose something like ultramarine blue to that hue. So you can see the advantage of keeping in mind what the hue is that we see rather than the tube color itself. So that's one of the major keys. And even though there are painters who do work with the tube color in mind, they know that tube color and they know which way it leans. And so even though they're not thinking perceptual thoughts about what the hue is, they're still aware of what that hue is, and that's what makes it work. But when we're learning how to mix color and how to always get the color we want, then if we're working according to the hues names rather than tube colors, we'll end up with the right color every time. Let's do an analysis now to see how that works. Let's use this photo of azaleas. What we notice first of all is the kind of light the azaleas are receiving, because that's the another real strong influence on color. We'll see a green such as this or a red such as this as a different color. In fact, in many cases, it might be a different hue if it's in diffused light as opposed to direct light. So the quality of light and the quality of weather is going to influence how we see these colors, how they appear to our eyes. So that's the first part. Now, so we'll look at these azaleas and we might call them red. And then if we move the color wheel around, we can see, let's move it over here so that the reds are in the vicinity of that. I'll start moving it around and we see different hues of red, different hues that contain red but are not registering as red themselves in all places of those azaleas, in all locations on those azaleas. So we could start right up here and we see that this hue really registers red-violet. But then we move right over here, move the color wheel. So that is not, that has, we can see just a little bit of red-violet, but that's got more red in it. And so we can see here, in fact, that hue registers about right in here. We can see some red-orange in that. So we can move the color wheel around. What we're doing, I should have explained a little earlier, is we're comparing the areas of the hues on the wheel right here with where they are aligned with the colors themselves. So that's the kind of comparison we can make. Now you can actually cut the center out of any color wheel and you can look through it into nature and you can see that. You can move the color wheel around the same way you see me moving it here. You can move it around and you can actually see what hues are in those colors you're seeing. So then let's do this a little bit more. Let's look on this side. Now we see, I want to point out what we saw over here as red-violet is in shadow. It's not receiving the light rays that this area is receiving. And so some of this yellow that's in red sort of subdues and causes it to lean more towards the red-violet in the way we're looking at it. And look at what happens in here. We see a range in here from red, we do see a little bit of red-violet, to orange. Now, do we see any yellow-orange? I think that is really a higher value of the hue orange. So you can see why it's important to be aware that whatever colors we're looking at might have a range of hues within them according to where they're located in light and according to where they're located in shadow. So that's the first principle, and you might say that's the first correction that we would make to how we look at the color wheel. So that's one kind of relationship that we have outlined for us on the color wheel. How we can look within the color wheel and we can find how much hue there is, how much of one hue or another there is in any color we're looking for. But it's important, two things are important here. One is that we distinguish it as hue and use the hue name. Yellow when we see yellow, yellow-orange when we see yellow-orange, blue-violet when we see blue-violet, red, and so on. We do that, that gives us a perceptual registering that enables us then to see what we need to do or what hue we might need to add to a color in order to get it, in order to arrive at a color we need. So that's a hue relation, one kind of hue relationship. So we might call this an additive relationship, where we're adding hue to get a new hue. But there's another kind of relationship that we can find on the wheel that is subtractive. And that is when we add complementary hues to each other. When we mix complementary hues, the opposite happens. Rather than a hue changing to a new hue, the hues actually begin to disappear. Now let's look at how that works. So we can take the hue of red, start right here in the red column. Now we can see that the hue directly across from red is green. We know that. We know that they're complements. So we're going to add a little green to red, make a new splotch, and we see some of the red hue has gone away. We will add a little bit more green to the red, and we see even more hue goes away. So we can see that green is taking red, or taking the hue of red out of the color. It's changing the character of the color. Let's add more. Now we see the red is almost gone. Let's take even more. We're going to add even more green to red. Now it's almost totally gone. Now if we keep adding green to red, this will happen. All the color goes away. Well, I had a little residue there. All the color goes away. And then if we keep adding, if we add a little bit more green to red, what happens? We start getting more green. It doesn't have as much green in it as the green at its fullest saturation. But what we've been doing is desaturating. That's what complementary hues do to each other. They reduce each other. So that's what they do when they're mixed together. They reduce each other. But then this wonderful thing happens when they're adjacent to each other. Right? Let's put that right here. Now, it's the same green. I didn't change the green at all. It's the same saturation as right here, but when I put it adjacent or in the center of a red, it looks greener. The red enhances the green. Now that's what complementary hues do to each other. It's also what a higher saturation will do to a lower saturation. So that's what we mean when we talk about the relationship of hues on the color wheel and what those hues do to each other. Let's stop now and give you a chance to ask your questions. Great question. Why can't the primaries be created? I wish I knew the answer to that one. I wish also I realized when we were watching this with you, I needed to be a little bit more specific that it's the highest saturation of primaries that can't be created. Now, if you combine together two tertiary colors that each have a primary in them, and in the tertiary colors, you can see on the color wheel behind me there that on the tertiary colors, the ones complementary to each other do have a primary in common because of the way they are connected, or their relationship I was talking about. But so if you mix together something like a blue-green and red-violet, it's going to turn blue because both of those tertiaries have blue in them. But it's also going to be a low saturation blue because they both have also in them complements. So blue-green then has the yellow component in it, and red-violet has the violet component. And we know that yellow and violet are complements. So that portion of that combination neutralizes or desaturates, but then the double, you might call it the double portion of blue in both of those is accented. And so you get a low intensity blue. And so from that viewpoint, the blue could be created at a lower saturation by combining two tertiary colors together. But at its high saturation, I don't know. It is a matter of something that's primary, most elemental in the universe. Is what would you mix together to get blue at its high saturation? The blue that's blue now, not a blue that leans towards violet or leans towards green, a blue that's blue. Or what would you mix together to get yellow? Or what would you mix together to get red at their high saturation and at their exact registration as primaries? So that's one of those secrets of the universe. Only the universe knows why it is that you can't mix primaries. So yeah, that's something for you all to go out and contemplate. And if you come up with an answer, let me know, because I'll be happy to get that answer and pass it around. All right, Cheryl says, I painted a painting with double complement, red, orange, red, violet, yellow, green, and blue, green. That would be, yes. The red, orange was saturated by design, but the painting feels out of harmony. Thinking it is the saturation. Oh, you're thinking it's the saturation. Well, if it's out of harmony, it could be that, you see, you've got the whole, when you're working with double complements of the tertiaries, it's a wonderful palette to work with. But one thing that we have to be cautious with there is that we keep a common hue within that. In other words, to have harmony, the harmony of all the parts of color working together, we have harmony of hue. It's the hues harmony that makes it feel harmonious. And so one of those needs to be dominant. One of those hues needs to have a slight dominance. Now, it is true that when all the colors when there's desaturation, really, when there's desaturation, all the primaries are there by design, if you think about it. So if we're looking, to give you an example, you know every complement, one set of complements, is composed of a primary and a secondary. All three colors, in other words, all three primaries. And so as we're mixing those together, and as they are canceling each other's hue out, they are also adding into each other all of their components. And so in anything that's desaturated, all the colors are present. So that's why nature feels so harmonious. It's because there's so little you're going to see in nature that's fully saturated. And even in environments where you do find, like, it's usually in flowers that's fully saturated. Sometimes the sky feels pretty saturated. But you'll find that within that environment, there are desaturated colors around it. So I hope it could be the saturation. It could, but I think maybe, Cheryl, you might look for a hue conflict in there. Are there two hues that are more saturated that are conflicting with each other? Of course, I would need to see the painting to be able to help you analyze that, but you might check that. Okay, so other questions now about this whole problem, the whole issue of the color wheel. I'm expecting somebody to ask a question about the issue of placing your color. How selects primaries? How selects primaries? Sophia. Do you mean how do you select primaries? Could you kind of rephrase that for me? Because sometimes I'm a little slow in the uptake to comprehend what a question means. Sort of make your question a little bit longer. Kind of rephrase it for me. a lot of people, and this is one thing I mentioned, but I kind of wanted to elaborate on it a little bit. The difference between working in your thinking process and setting up your color wheels from with tube colors versus the color wheel. Okay, so Cheryl's going to take another look. Also, we seem to have to consider the particular hue formation from different manufacturers. Yes, that's true. That's true. And that does get into, when you think about that different manufacturers will produce tube colors that have the same label on them, but what comes out of those tubes is different. One real prevalent example there is the label burnt sienna. That's some of the companies will. So the burnt sienna in some of the companies will be dark and more transparent, dark in value, more transparent, lean a little bit more towards red, orange. Others will be a little lighter in value, much more opaque, and maybe leaning a little bit towards orange. So the fact that it's burnt sienna doesn't mean anything, a whole lot to you, unless you use that same brand all the time, and can you're coming up with your decision making for color. You're referring to what does that burnt sienna do when you mix it with other colors, that sort of thing. Okay, Sophia. All right, so those are just comments. So when that's one reason why it can be confusing. Another example of that is yellow ochre. I've seen many examples of yellow ochre from a number of manufacturers where there might be 5 different yellow ochres and they all say yellow ochre on the tube, but they all are different. Some of them will lean a little bit more towards green. Some will lean a little bit more towards orange. Some of them will be a little more, maybe a little bit more transparent than others. So you see, when you're depending on the actual tube name for coming up with your color mixtures, you have to be very careful about the colors that you get. However, on the other hand, I should say, if you identify your tube colors according to their hue names, whatever comes out of that tube, it doesn't matter which manufacturer it is, whatever comes out of that tube, if you can identify it as to its hue name, which way is it red orange? Is it red violet? Is it red? Is it high saturation? Or is it a lower, kind of middle saturation, partially saturated, partially desaturated? Don't you see what I mean? And not only that, but what value is it coming out of the tube? And not only that, but how transparent is it coming out of the tube? Because the characteristic of the colors we get, well, a lot of that will be dependent upon the transparency of the colors that comes out of the tube. Okay, Joni says, let me see, there's Cheryl's comment, gives me something to go back and consider without the harmony painting. Okay, oh, I see what you're saying. You're going to go back and take a look at that, and look at it from that point of view of what's happening in terms of hue, what's happening, and that sort of thing. All right, I said enough on that. Now, Joni says, completely turned off. What? Wondering about the emotional aspect of loving a certain hue and completely turned off by, oh, I see what you mean there. Completely turned off by another hue, or maybe it's just me. Hey, don't worry about that, Joni. We're all humans, and we all have preferences, and we all have things that we don't enjoy. It's like color, the colors that we prefer as painters. Not only as painters, but as observers. But let's talk about painters, because that's what this YouTube chat is about, working as painters. As painters, there are some colors that we're more drawn to, that we feel more akin to, and there's some we don't. And that's part of our artistic voice, part of who we are, what pulls us to it, what we feel more kinship with. And I don't think it's anything you need to fight at all. I think it's just part of your uniqueness as a human being, and your uniqueness as an artistic voice. So I would say that if anybody tries to push you towards expanding that and trying to like or enjoy or work with colors that you don't like and you don't enjoy, I put them in their place, because they've got no business meddling in that portion. It's one thing to understand how color works, but there's another thing if they're colors that you have a stronger relationship to, you feel more at home with as far as your expression. They are more interesting as far as your I should say your artistic expression. I'm stumbling all over the place. I can't exactly phrase it like I want to, but anyway, and that's just that's the only way I know how to explain it. It's all about our human uniqueness, and it's true that we find the diversity. That's the word I'm coming with. Through that, we find the diversity of all painters, and it doesn't matter if you have 36 painters of equal mastery, but it's all going to be interesting, because they're all going to have their unique voice and all these variations, including the colors that they speak to and through more often are better. It's part of that artistic voice. All right, I think I kind of stumbled and rambled a bit on that one, but sometimes that happens, as you know, and those of you who are used to these chats are used to that sort of thing now. Okay, let's see. Emotional aspect of loving a certain color. That's what you ask about. Yeah, well, that has to do with emotion. The things that we love or hate. Love and hate are emotions, I think, are the result of emotion or something like that. I don't want to get into that, but anyway. Okay. Thank you for the compliments I'm seeing. Okay, Grant, can you comment on how transparency affects the hue when mixed with opaque hue? Yes, and this is important too, Grant, in that there is, when two transparent colors are mixed together in their transparency stage, we get what feels like a truer hue because of the way the light is able to, the way the light reflects into those colors. But when an opaque color is mixed into a transparent color, it flattens the ability of the light to hit it. Transparent color, the light goes through. The opaque color kind of blocks the light and sends it back. And the other thing is that in pigments, when we're mixing pigments, it's different. We have a different response or different results when we're mixing opaque colors than we do when we're mixing transparent colors. For example, I've heard if you ever work with kids with tempera, and you try to teach them that red plus blue equals green, but that tempera is opaque, and when you mix an opaque red, what did I say? Red plus blue. I meant red. What did I say? Anyway, yellow plus blue equals green. If you mix an opaque yellow with an opaque blue, you'll get a greenish, but it will be kind of a muddy green. It won't be that true, deep, highly saturated green. But if you mix two transparent colors that are pretty close to exact registration, you do get a clean green from them. If you mix a transparent blue with a transparent yellow, now that's hard to find, but there is such a thing available. But if you mix those together, you get a really nice, highly saturated green. However, if you mix an opaque blue, if you mix a transparent blue with an opaque yellow, it produces kind of a muddy green. It has to do with the way the pigments affect each other. Now, as far as the, so that's the way, that's what we watch with our mixing. And we choose colors according to the truest version of what we need. So that's well, I guess maybe I'm going to get myself backed into a corner if I go too deep into that. But now, as far as their uses, the feeling of the transparency and the feeling of the opaque, the transparent with the transparent colors, we're able to create kind of a depth of layering of color that creates a kind of a depth of the color because of the way the light goes through it and bounces back at us and blends those colors together. Whereas with the opaque beside it, you get a different, a flatter effect. And sometimes those can kind of emphasize each other. You notice in the old traditional methods of the Renaissance painters, where after they started painting with oils, I should say post-Renaissance, because most of the Renaissance painters were using fresco, or some of them were using some oils or beginning to experiment with oils. But nevertheless, one of the methods of that painting was layering paints, and it would start with the shadow areas, the more transparent. They didn't have that many transparent colors available to them. But then the more opaque and lighter colors would go on last, and you could have that tension or that's created between a transparent and opaque that gives a depth and a lovely light and a lovely vibration between the light and the shadow areas because of the transparency and the opaque. All right, so I hope I didn't confuse you further or more. You weren't confused, you just asked a question. Okay, Joni says, definitely drawn. Yeah, she's definitely drawn certain hues. Yeah, we all are. Cheryl says, how can we plan our color palette when we have serendipitous? That word's so stumpy. Serendipitous effects, like when you put the desaturated green into the saturated orange in the video. I love it when colors create something wonderful. How can we plan the palette? Well, I have that method that, and it works every time. You can always, it's amazing to me how it works. It works every time. I have that method of setting up the palette where I will begin with the local color I'm looking at. And those of you who've taken the workshops and the courses on the Academy are familiar with this. But determining the local color or local hue, and then set the palette up according to the local hue. I won't go into it here because I want this to stay pretty much to the relationships, how the colors relate with each other on the wheel, and things that are related to that. But if you just do this sort of thing, if you have your local colors or whatever color there, and then you have another set of colors or a color that's going to desaturate that, then you're going to have that ability of what you were talking about. They're going to have the ability for wonderful things to happen between the saturation or the desaturation. You can control the saturation when you have the ability already set on the palette to do that. So that and then I always like to have that ability when I'm setting up for every color on the palette. I think I've got quick tips on this too. I have got quick tips on this. Where I start, there's a local color you're looking at. There is the complement that needs to go on the palette. When you have the ability to warm it, that needs to be available on the palette. You need to have the ability to cool it. And then we go to the next color. Now, the marvelous thing, the next color we see, next local color we see in the scene, or whatever we're looking at. The marvelous thing about that is usually when we set up that first set of colors, or I have that first set of colors available on the palette, the local, its complement, ability to cool, ability to warm. 9 times out of 10, for your next color you're seeing, you've got the ability right there to do the same thing for it. So sometimes that's not true, but usually you only have to put one other hue or one other color. I'm gonna call them color. One other color on the palette in order to be able to, and then you'll see what you already have on the palette will answer those questions for the new local color that goes on the palette. I hope that didn't sound too confusing, but I do have quick tips on that. Eve is learning. Oh, good. I'm so glad. Okay, let's see. I laughed because all of a sudden all the questions lit up. Thank you for those comments on the transparency. Okay. Now some things make sense actually on the same out of the harmony pattern. Good, wonderful. Now I had a thought when I was talking about setting up the palette. I had a thought, and now it's going south on me. Something I wanted to mention also, and going back to the tube color thing. Oh yes, in that ability, yeah. In that setting up the local color, also have potential when you're setting up that palette. Have potential for going fully saturated and fully neutral. Now, the complement will give you the potential for going fully neutral. But sometimes the colors that we set up as for the local colors, we don't want to start with a fully saturated. But if we have potential for that, then we have the ability, when we actually are moving to the painting, to create that wonderful little shimmer and actually luminous quality that we can get when we juxtapose hues or when we juxtapose saturations, where we have a less saturated area with a more fully saturated area. That simultaneous contrast effect. All right, let's see. Thank you. I think that's good advice. And
What you just said.
what I just said. Okay. All right. So I also wondered, the idea of hue when we were mixing hues together, that they actually that complements will actually subtract out the hue. I think thinking of going back to the saturation thing again, thinking about that's really what happens when you mix complements together, rather than just calling it lowering the intensity or raising the intensity, lowering the saturation, raise the saturation. But when it registers within your being, that you're really pulling hue out, that the amount of hue itself present, has to do with the saturation. The amount of hue that we can actually see in with our eyes. When it's fully saturated, we see all the hue of that color that's possible. When it's desaturated, we see less hue. And then the ability within all that to go lighter and darker with those. Of course, then we get into another discussion on the value thing. Okay. I do follow your palette setup, but sometimes things get out of whack. Maybe adding in a hue that shouldn't be there. You mean you're adding in a hue that shouldn't be there? Is that what you mean? Yeah. Could be. All right, so then Carolyn asks, as a beginner, I use Indian yellow as a background for a purple iris, but the teacher felt it was inappropriate. What about backgrounds? Did the teacher explain why it was inappropriate? Usually, let's say this about background, Carolyn, because I think this is important. And that is, for one thing, if instead of thinking, like especially for flowers, and I assume that might have been a still life that you were painting, especially if there's a still life. Rather, she didn't like Indian yellow for backgrounds. Oh, well, that's her personal preference, I suspect. I don't want to be ugly. Okay, it's still life. Good. All right. Every still life painting has a subject or has a set of subjects, a set of images, and an environment in which they're sitting or living. They're living in an environment. They're there in that environment, and it's the environment that you're painting. And so, if we call, I know background is a traditional word. Background, middle ground, foreground. What does that mean? It's just describing It's just describing where things are located in space. So if something's in the foreground of space, then it's closer to you. If it's in the middle ground of space, it's further from you. If it's in the background of space, it's even further than that from you. So to just say background as a backdrop, then that makes that idea as dead space. So rather than to think of the space around your flowers, you said iris. No. Yeah, you were painting for purple iris. Sorry. Rather than think about that being a background around the purple iris, what about it being a definition or a description of the space that iris is living in? Now, I'm not one to say that any tube color is not appropriate for any area in a painting. How can that be? How can that be? It can't be, because what happens in the painting, what happens in that environment or in the area around your iris is this environment, and if that happens to be if the colors that you're working there happen to be working together in a composition, so that using Indian yellow is appropriate not appropriate is that's not the right word. So the Indian yellow does what you need for it to do in that environment. Well, I don't see how in the world that cannot be appropriate. Now, as far as, I didn't mean to yell, but you folks will probably tell there's some things I can get hot under the collar about, and that is prejudice. Prejudice always gets me hot under the collar, especially when it comes to prejudice against what goes where in a painting. Because every painting is unique, every subject is unique, and what you do with it is unique. And so when we say things like that, I mean, if I got to be careful here too, because I don't want to insult anybody, but it's misleading to say that any tube color can't be used to help describe any area of a painting. So Carolyn, what did I do there? I just thought the colors looked good together. Well, I would have to see the work, and I don't know. Maybe they did look good together. Maybe what you were doing with that Indian yellow in the background did enhance the violet, because violet and yellow in their generic range are complements. They do enhance each other. So when there's a violet, when you've got an image that's violet, you're going to enhance it with yellow. Now, if you use that yellow in the background or around it in this environment in as saturated version as you use that iris, they might have been contradicting each other and made it harder to see. But if you use that in such a way that you maybe add a little bit of that violet that's in the iris into the yellow, to the Indian yellow as you were working, I can really imagine how that might be made to work by using those two basic hues as in their combinations and their different value potentials. I can see how that might create a very interesting and exciting painting. I could also see how it might create a conflicting. Uh, I can see how the two colors together might conflict each other if both of them are used in a high saturation. But see, I'm dealing with a lot of assumptions here because I haven't seen the painting. But what I'm objecting to is for anybody to tell you that one tube color or another is not appropriate without giving you an explanation as to why it's not working. So, all right, so I better just get off that high horse and go to another high horse. Who else has got a high horse for me to ride? Let's see. She didn't like the Indian, but still life. Okay. All right. So we're still having the little conversation with Carolyn there. All right. There is something else I wanted to maybe kind of lay out for you while we're in the discussion. The discussion about the tube colors. Indian yellow is a tube color. And that is that in the thinking process, how important it is for you to know your tube colors. And when I say know your tube colors, know what their potential is. We get to know them through using them, but too many times that happens through trial and error. But one good way to get to know your tube colors is with every tube color you have, make an analysis, make a chart. I like the charts for understanding what a tube color will do, what its capability is. That's all these tubes are anyway. They're potential. That's all in the world they are, potential. So for every tube color you have, try this. Set yourself up a chart. Now, here's what the chart's going to look like. You could say on the left side of the chart, it doesn't matter left or right, but let's say hypothetically it would be the left side of the chart. You're going to have at least 6 different value areas. So you'll have an area for the darkest dark, and think about that as maybe about value 9 or 10. Well, okay, so then we go to which one of the color, which number. But think about that as being something about like this on a value scale. So that would be that area of the chart, and then the next little block on the chart would be an interval lighter in value, and then the next one an interval lighter, all the way. In other words, those 6 values are going to show potential for that color from what is its darkest dark potential and what is its lightest light potential, and just use white to raise the value for the darker colors. And so you'd label that darkest dark, middle dark, middle, high middle, low middle, and so on, right on up to light. Well, that's one way to do it. But so then, as you go into the next section, you name that hue, the hue of whatever's in the tube. So, for example, now hue and color. Let's distinguish. Hue is usually what we mean when we call a color a color. A color is not a color unless it has all 3 parts. A color has hue, but then it becomes more of a color with the value and with the saturation of it. The color of burnt sienna is the combination of burnt sienna at that particular hue of red-orange, at that particular saturation of, you might say, middle to low saturated, depending on which one of those burnt siennas we have. The value, as it comes out of the tube, is probably dark. Did I say them all? Okay, so you would name the hue and name it according to these names right here, these labels on the color wheel. They name it yellow or yellow-orange or so on. As we know our labels to be around the color wheel, don't call it cyan if it's blue-green. Don't call it fuchsia if it's a red-violet. Don't call it those generic names because that misleads you if you will locate, or locate, that's not a good word. If you will make a perceptual registration in your head of what the hue is of red, orange, or blue, green. What is that hue? What is your perception of that hue at its high saturation? What is your perception of that hue at its middle saturation? Or what is your perception of that hue at its lower saturation? And then you've got the values of that. So what I'm saying is that every tube to color, get to know it as to its potential, what is the darkest dark it will make, and what is the lightest light you can get. Well, and so a lot of those tube colors won't even start when you start to make charts of them. They wouldn't start on the darkest dark. They start on the chart at whatever their darkest value, inherent value is. So anyway, what I'm saying is about this getting to know your tube colors. Get to know their potential from what their darkest ability is to their lightest ability, what their inherent hue is, what their inherent saturation is. So you've got the value, hue, and saturation, and that is color. But when you, I'm preaching, I sound like I'm preaching, but this is really important to your color mixing, so that when you as a painter speak the word color or recognize the color, you're recognizing that as a combination of those three things. The combination of its hue, not just green, but is it a blue-green or is it a yellow-green? See the difference? Because that's going to determine what colors you choose and what you do with those colors. And then the degree of saturation and the value. So I think I probably made that, I maybe overdid that, but I think it's important when we really use color for correcting or coming up with the color that we're trying to get. When we really know how to use the hue, how the hue works when we use hues, mixing hues around the wheel, mixing hues across the wheel, when we really know what those do, we reach that point when we process a painting, we don't have to think about it. We just, we have that automatic knowledge, and we know where to reach on the palette to get those colors. So, all right. Carolyn says that's great. It is wonderful. Did we lose folks? I quit asking questions. Or did I bore you, or what did I do there? Oh my goodness, we're almost out of time. Okay, do we have any more questions at all? Anything that you're still in doubt about using the color wheel? Oh, Joni says she loves these chats. Thank you. The chats about color. Cheryl says, thanks, Dianne and Roger. Roger doesn't get enough recognition because he's in the background over there running everything, and he doesn't get enough recognition. So I got to remember to give you a call out every now and then. Yeah. All right. All these color discussions have helped me tremendously, Cheryl says. Good. Wonderful. Yeah, it's one of the most exciting things, as all of you know, those of you who have been with me for a while, is that color is one of my passions, and so I really do enjoy enlightening you in such a way that you can take those concepts and just do anything you want to with them. All right, so Lavin loves in color. Can you we've got another question, Terry. Can you comment on the mixing of jewel tones? Yes. Don't call them jewel tones. Look at those tones just like you do any other. What is the saturation? In this case, also, I think it would be what is the transparency? You're going to be dealing with your transparency there. What is the saturation? What is the value? And what are the hues that you're looking at? Because you're looking at combinations there. So all these categories that we put different kinds of colors in, they all come down to the same thing. of that I keep repeating the same thing over again, but they all come down to the same thing of what we've been talking about throughout this entire discussion. And so I hope that didn't sound like a cop out, but it's not. Okay, so got to get out of here. It's our hour has arrived. Thanks to all of you for participating. Thank you for attending. To all of you who are just on the sidelines listening, and we'll look forward to meeting with you again in December. What was that, 17th?
18th.
18th, 17th, 18th.
Third Sunday.
Third Sunday in December, and we'll give another topic a good going over. So thank you all, and bye-bye for now.